Well, let's tie a pine squirrel micro game changer. As you can see in the top right hand corner, I've got all my pieces laid out. I've got my pine squirrel all cut up into clips so I can create dubbing loops out of them. We start off with a wiggle shank, and the thread we're using is 8/0 uni in olive, dark olive. Now I tie in probably maybe 1/8 of an inch. I've stripped a couple of henback feathers and olive, India henback feathers and olive. I'm going to use this as my tail. I just need a little bit of the stem. And that area there where I tied in, I'm going to create my first dubbing loop out of squirrel hair. You don't need very much, about 3/4 of an inch in length, and then the width of it's probably 3/16 that sticks out. I just need a little fuzz. If you're curious, those nippers that I'm using I got from Walgreens. They've got a convex blade on them, so they trim very tight. I create a dubbing loop, spread a little wax, we've got that first clip laid out. And just spin the loop. Now we'll also have mixed my pine squirrel. I like to add sometimes a little bit of rust or crawdad orange to it, just to give it a little bit of redness. But for our purposes today, I'm just going to do it monochromatic, all in olive. And just wrap. Now, you can't tell, but every once in a while I'm wetting my fingers and sweeping back those hairs. Now I like the hair to go, I crowd the eye, and almost on purpose because I want it to cover up that eye as much as possible between each of the segments. Now I'm going to whip finish, and I'm also going to use a little super glue. Now the way I apply the super glue, I've got this little bottle with a needle on it, and the needle is a 27 gauge needle, and so the super glue comes out it barely a third of a drop, just enough to wet it. You can tell it's done it because it's darkened this thread. Now I'll trim, but a tendency of the super glue to get into the eye, so I always burn it out. That's all you need. But it has a tendency to creep into the hole, and so I just burn it out. What I use for my bodkin is a pin vise. And then the pin itself is actually the arrow from a blowgun. And I like sharp bodkins, so I can switch it out easily. That was the whole purpose. All right, so the first shank that I'm using is a 6mm micro shank from Flyman Fish Company. All right, now you use one of the angles on that triangle to mount in your vise. And I try to expose as much possible that where they junction, the two legs of that triangle. And I'm going to try to bring my thread up it, in fact. See how I'm building up the thread and actually going into the triangle? That's because then I can get more hair from the dubbing loop to cover up that joint. At this size though, it's so small, the hairs are so short on the dubbing loop, it's hard to cover it up. But that was the intent. Once again, dubbing loop, a little bit of a touch of wax. The wax is to help me so that that darn stuff doesn't, it'll slip out. That hair will slip out. So that wax really helps me out. Now this, I've got 1 inch in terms of length of the squirrel, but the actual width is probably about 1/2 inch. Spin it to get my loop. And once again, concentric wraps. Brush it back with some moisture. Just trying to get a real dense in there so that I get a nice taper from the overall fly. Now I like to do 6 whip finishes, 2 sets of 3. I learned this from a friend who taught me how to whip finish a long time ago. You see that bottle, it's only 1/4 inch long, the nose of it. And see how that glue I just get a drop, less than a drop sits on the top of that baby. And you just touch it and wicks right in. Then again, you get some into the eye, so I burn again. And it also gets rid of that excess hair. It was a choice between either not putting enough hair and crowding the eye or exposing more of the joint, and so I've elected to overcrowd the eye and then just burn out the extra. It does not change it still wiggles. It still hinges really well. All right, the next shank is once again another 6mm micro shank from Flyman. It's pretty much the same process. Now here though, yeah, this is the 6mm. So the length, once again, of the pine squirrel that I'm using is 1 inch, but the width, I did about 1/2 inch or so. I'll go a little bit longer and I'll go to 5/8. And what I'm trying to do is get that taper front to back. Once again, you can see I'm piling that thread right back into that triangle. And create a dubbing loop. You see I've got one of those CNF dubbing brush creators, but I cheated and I put a hook on it. And then I put a piece of plastic on the hook to split the thread. A little bit of dubbing wax. Yeah, if you're curious, Overton's. Badass stuff. And see how you can see it's about 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch wide on the hair? Yeah, you can see it right there. Spin the loop. And brush it out a little bit. I can tell you when you spin that loop, you put just enough tension on it, and then as soon as you start spinning it, ease off on the tension because it'll break the thread. So just leave it loose and then spin it some more. Concentric wraps up into the eye. Once again, whip finish. Trim off some of that hair. And just glue. Now, if you ever buy these things, I just keep a dot. It does not clog, but every once in a while it clogs a little bit. Just keep a little acetone and just dip it into a little puddle of acetone. And it'll clear. See, you can see it's burning off the super glue. That's what that white smoke is, I believe. All right, so the next shank is an 8mm shank from Flyman, and I use 1.25 inches instead, not just an inch, 1.25 inches, and then I'm using the width of the hair on there is probably about 1 inch, almost the full width, or 3/4 of an inch of the hair. It's almost just the hide and a little bit more. So cut as much hair on it as you possibly can. You'll see that here in a second. Now, I like these little tiny guys because the smallies in my pond, they love baby crawdads. And this is just about the right size. Just a little large, but just about the right size. And towards the end of the season, after the spawn, the smallies will go really deep and suspend. And you got to put it right in front of their face. So any way that I can add a little bit of life to my flies helps. It's a definite solution to a problem I've got, but also what makes it so much fun. Once again, dubbing loop. Open it up, put a little wax. And see how that's probably the longest hairs I can get out of a zonker strip of pine squirrel. And brush it out just a little bit. Wrap it concentric circles, concentric wraps, excuse me. But see how I build it? It goes right back into as far as I can get it into that triangle. And the reason for such density is so that the water helps that wiggle in the back of the head. Now I make the heads really dense to create that dead space behind the head of the fly. Now if it was perfect every time, this is how I would like it to end up, because I've got almost no material in front of the eye and I've got plenty of open space. Once again, going to whip finish. Little spot of glue on the thread. It doesn't take much, folks. You don't need to put a whole lot. See how the drop, half a drop? That's it. But I also know to burn out that excess glue. Now, we take this off. I'm going to mount a Kona Big Game Hunter, and this is a size 6. I love this hook. Man, it's a short shank, really heavy hook. This thing will pierce the jaw on a smallie or a largemouth. And it's got a wide enough gape that it can hook it and not have to depend on going through the jaw necessarily, but actually hook through it. You can also use a Gamakatsu SC15. That'll work too, but it's not as heavy. I love this hook. Got a pair of bead chain eyes. I have to use tweezers because my fingers are too fat. Little longanisas or Vienna sausages. You just get it in the way, figure-eight it on. Now I'm pushing back probably at least a bead and a half width back from the eye of the hook. I am going to glue that in place later, but after I add the joint. Just go back a little bit. Now I've got a piece of aught fluorocarbon. Actually, most of the times I just use 3X. I just happen to have aught at this time. And I'm going to clip a couple places on it. Just press it to have two flat spots. And what I'm doing is I'm matching up the flat spots, and then when I connect those two together, it creates a loop. So flat to flat is a lot more secure than round to round. You see, I've nailed it down once. I add the abdomen section. Go over once, and now I'm pulling it back on it to match the flat area to a flat area. And it's much more secure. Now, I don't worry about this, and I don't use wire or anything like that because I don't need to, because there's no pressure on that back end. Now, go back over the top and just wrap that sucker down. Now, you saw me, I wrapped it up and under the front, so I won't lose that back end. Now this is my own version of a palm vise, palm tool. I got that little thing there, half dozen for $5 at one of the stationery stores like Staples or Office Depot. See that glue? I've got another needle, but that's an 18 gauge needle, and it also does not clog. Now I'm going to create a loop. And this is I use a piece that's probably 1.5 to 2 inches long. And it's the widest piece of pine squirrel that I can find. And what I mean by wide is the length of the hairs on it. So I go searching far and wide for the widest piece I can find. It's got the longest hairs is what I'm asking for. You see create that dubbing loop. It's about 2 inches long. Yeah, about 2 inches long. Spin it up. Once again, go easy. Just give it, don't put any pressure on it, and let it loop on itself and twist on itself. You're going to need to brush it out. Now, when I wrap actually on top of the joint, and I do not have a problem with it wiggling or swimming. And I make it really, really dense, because what I'm doing is creating a dead spot behind the head of the fly. And the density of this pine squirrel and the way that how much squirrel hair I have there gives that dead spot behind for the abdomen to wiggle in. Now, like everybody else, things fall apart and I drop the loop. Doesn't matter, it's not going to unfurl. You just pick it up again, start wrapping again. All right, bring the thread and tie it off right behind the eyes. Now I've got one more clip, and it's got about 1 inch of hair in terms of length, but it's also really wide. It's about 3/4 to 1 inch long, the hair. And that's going to cover between the eyes and the nose. Create my loop. A little bit of wax. Brush it out. Now there's all kinds of possibilities up here at the head. You could add, for a sculpin, you could add a couple feathers on the sides. You can add color in there. You could add 3 different colors of pine squirrel. All kinds of stuff. And I've been trying all of them. So, and then changing the materials. You know, sometimes feathers. I've just been doing fur lately. Tie it off. And whip finish. bit of glue. And then burn out the eye. Now I'm going to gather the hair. I'm going to wet my fingers and gather that hair. And then I'm going to put a little dab of UV resin, the thin stuff. I let it soak in. And then hit it with my lamp. My torch. Now I'm going to trim about a little bit of the hair so it doesn't foul the hook. And that's my micro game changer using pine squirrel. Oh, I've got that nub end, little excess of whatchamacallit, the wiggle shank.